Okay, it's noon, so I think we can go ahead and get started. Desiree, are you ready on your end?
Yes, I've got the recording started and I'm still admitting a couple of people into the meeting now.
Okay, I'll give it another minute. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. I would like to call to order this meeting of the Assembly Budget and Finance Committee of the Whole. Today is Thursday, May 14, and we are noticed from noon to 1 p.m. We'll go ahead and start with a call with introductions, and Ms. Camacho, would you go ahead and do roll, please?
Yes. Miss Allard.
Here.
Mr. Constant.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Miss Kennedy. Miss Kennedy. Miss LaFleur.
Here.
Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Here.
Mr. Peterson.
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson. Here. Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
Miss Zalatel.
Here.
Okay, and let me try Miss Kennedy. Okay, I believe you have everybody but Miss Kennedy.
Thank you, Ms. Camacho. We also have members of the administration here. I see Ms. Marshall from IT, Mr. Moore from Treasury, Mr. Slipka from Finance, and also Mr. Wilbur from OMB, and Mr. Gates, our Assembly Attorney as well, and Nolan Clouda from the Budget Advisory Commission. Did I miss anyone else here? Okay, and let me just ask members if you want to get in the queue to put yourself in the chat, or if you're having problems with the chat, you can always text me. I'll keep an eye on my text, 907-351-7199, and please, we'll go ahead and refrain from putting anything of substance, any policy discussions in the chat, and just use it for putting ourselves in the queue. Okay, so moving on to the agenda, we have a very full agenda today. We'll go through new business, update on the 2020 budget, moving on to the 2021 budget schedule, the MOA financial status, a report from the Budget Advisory Commission, touch on scope and status of pay correction liability, life cycle replacements and moving SAP HEC in-house, and then any other business. Then we'll move on to the committee legislative and budget priorities, and then end with audience participation. So before we move into our first item, does anyone have anything they wanted to add to the agenda? Let me pull up the chat here. I don't see anyone in the queue. Okay, with that then we'll go ahead and move to our first item, which is an update on the 2020 budget by Lance Wilbur, OMB Director.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the Assembly. Good afternoon. I think my presentation on today will be relatively short, but I'll start with Right now on the 2020 budget, of the departments that have been, as far as we know, on their spend, other than some extra work related to COVID-19, any activities that they may have been active in that process since the middle of March, most of the other departments continue to stay open for business and do the things that they normally do. The two places where we've had some where we know that the expenses are going to be down is one is in the library, and then the other is going to likely be on the transit side, since the transit has not been operational since about the middle of April. We are looking to bring transit back on board here in the coming weeks, so I know that that service will be picking back up. But overall, departments continue to operate as much as they possibly can, and on their budget side, I don't see any current anomalies on their day-to-day activities. Obviously, the adjustments that we have made in some of our revenues as it relates to fees and permit fees, that will influence our year-end revenue stream. And as we move through the summer and we know a little bit more about that, we'll be working with Treasury to refine those projections on the revenue. So as far as a report, one of the things that Alex and I are working on together is, as his team is closing out 2019, and I think they basically are near the very end of that. They're working on a couple pieces before they can finally put a bow on that. When they finish 19, then we can start giving the budget to actuals in a more accurate sense to the Assembly. We were initially thinking that your first budget to actuals report will probably be in July, and that will be a quarterly report that will include the utilities. It's possible that we will have a general government report for you during our June meeting. So that's what's going on for budget to actuals. I'll stop right there on 3AA, and if there's any questions, I'll entertain them now. Thank you, Madam Chair, and then I'll go on to the next.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Do members have any questions? I am not seeing anyone in the chat.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
You want to continue?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The next item is how the impacts of COVID-19 are on our budget. I talked briefly about that. I think the biggest pieces have been that early on, the departments were consuming their operating budget for COVID-19 expenses. However, at the meeting in March, and as most recently as your last Assembly meeting, we created a separate fund, and we populated that fund with our cash reserves, and we have sought reimbursement for many of the expenses we've incurred since April. So initially, departments were seeing a hit to their department budget on things that they didn't expect to spend, which were COVID related. We have moved those to the fund, and we're cleaning that up. So all of the expenses will be shown, whether they've been spent or encumbered as it relates to COVID-19, to the emergency fund that the administration established with the Assembly report. That fund has a total of $13 million in it, with the two appropriations, one for $3 million and one for $10 million, or $12 million, I'm sorry, the second, so 15 total. As far as their operations, folks in pretty much in finance or in central services or development services, planning, street maintenance, the impacts of COVID may have some minor effect on their business as it relates to their day-to-day activities, but as it relates to their budget, I don't see anything sort of outstanding that's not related to COVID-19, which we are addressing.
Mr. Wilbur, we
Yes.
have a question for you from Ms. Kennedy.
Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Ms. Chair and Mr. Wilbur. Mr. Wilbur, the tracking of these expenses and that, how difficult is that for all these departments to do? Are they finding that it's pretty easy to keep track, or do things tend to bleed over between everyday operations versus some of the things that are being done for the emergency? I mean, how awkward is this for staff to truly track?
I don't believe it is, because our system is set up so that, and the instructions were given to departments early on And I'll give an example. If we had employees that are assisting at the Emergency Operations Center, we have some folks from HR, we have some folks from procurement, we have several folks from the fire department, from development services. Their time spent over there is being tracked, and we ask them to charge their labor on their time card, and we've set up a special code that they charge their time for. If for some reason they're at the EOC on Mondays and Wednesdays, but Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays that they're at their regular job, their normal regular account for coding their time would go to a different account. If they have an expense that's related to COVID-19 for purchase of protection equipment, or they're hiring a contractor, they are to code that non-labor expense with the code that we've set up and the accounts we've set up. So at any given time, we can determine how much labor has actually been coded to COVID-19, and then the balance of it is to their regular day jobs. And this is not new to us. We actually set this framework up when we had the earthquake. We had to create the wheel then. We just brought the wheel back out and gave it a different account code for a different purpose and different tracking, because there may be some earthquake activities that may be going on, particularly on the construction side, and they're accounting those to the earthquake, so we can track them for FEMA reimbursement. If they're doing something for COVID, we can request FEMA reimbursement for COVID activities. So we have established a structure so that we can track.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Lots of wheels turning then. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. We have another question for you, Mr. Wilbur, from Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I was wondering, since the people that were normally going to be working at the election center counting ballots, the 95% of them decided not to do that this year, and we had to use members, employees from different departments to fill in there. Does that qualify as reimbursable from the CARES Act? Do we know? Thank you.
I think if we brought people through the chair, Mr. Peterson, if we brought individuals in to help support our services, no matter what they were, related and in a time in response to providing a service at a time during COVID-19, as long as we have tracked those activities and have a justification for it, we will certainly ask for reimbursement under the CARES Act or through FEMA, one of the two.
Okay.
I can verify with Ms. Jones to find a little bit more out about that.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Wilbur.
Thank you,
if you want to
Chair.
go ahead and continue.
Sure. So the last item under 3A is the CARES Act funding for Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is the funding sources that are coming directly from, that will be coming from the state. So we are going to be receiving CARES Act fund through other federal agencies to the municipality. This particular set of funding is coming from the state, and the recent news from the legislature earlier this week. We will be looking at how we are going to apply that funding in 20 and probably parts of it in 21. I haven't had a chance to talk with the mayor's office about exactly how we're going to allocate that. I know that there are some restrictions in parts of it. There are some requirements on others. The school district has also reached out to me to ask me some questions about what the administration is thinking about doing. So it will be an ongoing topic, not only for the continuation of 20, but the likely parts of 2021. And I think as a standing item on this agenda, we can just give you an update on our progress during these monthly meetings of the Assembly's Budget and Finance Committee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilbur. Do members have any questions on this item of the agenda? Okay, Seeing no one in the chat, we can go ahead and move on to item B, 2021 budget schedule.
Okay.
Mr. Wilbur?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Earlier today, I sent out a budget schedule for the development of 2021. I sent it to the directors, and I sent a copy to Desiree, so she can forward that to the assembly members. The schedule itself is similar to our schedule for last year. There's a lot of things that are sort of new to us, things that are going to influence how this schedule could be put together, but I'll highlight a couple things. I had an opportunity to review it with Desiree initially to make sure that our assembly meetings towards the end of adoption were a good place to start and anticipated plan. And what we do is look at the schedule based on the dates we're required to meet by code. And one of those dates is, frankly, the first date is giving the assembly sort of an initial look of what the administration is thinking in preparing the 2021 budget during the first of September, and then we'll plan to submit the budget on October 2nd to the assembly, and then the introduction will be on October 13th. So looking at those dates and going backwards to where we are, in general, we're looking to get the capital, we just started to work on the capital budget for 2021. We're going to ask departments to give us their submissions next month. We've been working with the community councils with a new tool with the assistance of IT to refresh the tool and the survey instrument that community councils will be submitting their projects to us through the middle of June. And we can talk a little bit more about that. And then we've been talking to departments about the schedule on the capital side. We'd like to get the capital budget done somewhere around, pretty much almost all the way done around August. And then as departments are submitting their submissions to us, their submissions to the administration will be due at around the 20th of July. And then the OMB will be working with the administration to finish all of the budgets basically for the month of September and the assembly documents before we give it to you. Again, I sent a pretty detailed schedule to all of the directors. I know the budget coordinators, and to Desiree. So go ahead and take a look at that. And if you guys have any questions, please let me know.
Well, actually, we have a question for you now, Mr. Wilbur, from Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I received this question from a constituent yesterday and wanted to be able to answer it. Can you just tell me what the administration's priorities for the budget, for the upcoming budget, are going to be?
I haven't had a chance to talk with the mayor if he's had any changes in his priorities, but they're going to continue to be, at least as I know as of today, public safety, homelessness, what we can do to make sure that we're doing everything to support our local economy in as many possible ways as possible. I know that there's continued interest to make sure that we're revitalizing parts of our town and our neighborhoods. So our priorities haven't changed, as I know. How we approach them and the level and the activity in which we do in those priorities, I know that we're going to have some opportunities, and we're also going to have some changes with what we're going to be looking for in 21 on the alcohol tax. We're also going to be, 21 is going to be a little bit different without MLMP. So we've got a lot of things that we're working on to shore up in 21.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Any other questions from members on the timeline? Okay, let's see. I don't see anybody in the chat. So we'll go ahead and move on to the next item, which is MOA financial status. Mr. Slivka.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to talk a little bit, Mr. Moore, our treasurer, is going to provide an update on monthly revenues. I'll remind everybody that, of course, the vast majority of the municipality's revenue is realized in the form of property taxes, and it's much too early for that to even be known. The status of the municipality as a whole remains excellent. We pay our bills on time. We have answered a number of questions from the rating agencies in regards to the impact of this pandemic on the municipality's finances. And this is where being reliant on property tax is distinct from sales tax and income tax proved to be to our benefit. The one I would highlight that we have put out to the rating agencies is obviously the reduction in tourism is going to mean a reduction in hotel motel bed tax. How big a reduction is not known, but we have estimated to the rating agencies based on just how long we think travel will be down, that that number could be $20 million less across all of the various entities that receive hotel motel bed tax. That won't actually have an adverse impact on our ability to meet our obligations under the debt that has been issued in relation to the convention center. We should be able to navigate that in good shape. I'll stop there, see if there are any overall questions before Mr. Moore talks a little bit about our revenue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Slivka. I don't see anyone in the chat, so seeing no one, we can go ahead and move on to the next item.
Dan, do you want to talk a little bit about revenue?
Okay, this is Dan Warren, the city treasurer. So at this time of year, this is the time of year, even in normal times, where we would first reach out to the departments and ask them to start looking at 4 months worth of actual data, and then to help inform us on how to project the remainder of the year. What we've done for this year is we're trying to stick to that schedule. We're probably 2 weeks later than normal. We did spend quite a bit of time analyzing and sort of laying out a template that we can track the 2020 revenues versus what it would have been under normal conditions in 2019. And we're going to do a comparison all throughout this year, both on a monthly and a quarterly basis as it pertains to each revenue. I don't have an actual number to give the Assembly today because it is the start of our analysis. We do plan at the third week of June to do our briefing with the exec committee, exec group here at the city. That includes the CFO, the municipal manager, economic development, Chris Schutte. It's a whole variety of people. There's about 8 or 9 top administration people that are briefed on sort of our full report. And that'll be the third week of June. As soon as we're done with that meeting, we're going to then submit a formal document to the Assembly like we normally would. And then that document will be updated every single month all the way through December. And so the Assembly will be kept apprised every month as to how things are looking. Alex is correct that with respect to room tax, that is the single largest revenue that we see as being hurt. That revenue is reported to us quarterly by the hotels. We actually do get the larger hotels to submit information to us monthly. And so we're going to find out by the end of this month how April turned out. We did get information on the first quarter, and it was, I think the estimate, and it wasn't 100% complete, but it was down about 15%, which is almost $1 million. But first quarter is the lowest quarter of the year. So anyway, that's kind of where we stand in terms of our timing. We're about a month out from being able to provide the Assembly with a formal report, and the numbers, are going to be significant. There's been lots and lots of various effects on revenues across many different departments for various reasons, but certainly all tied back to the virus. And so that's what we're doing. The only other thing I'd like to mention is just that we're also focused on some investment activity. So the Investment Commission just met a couple days ago, and we're going to be submitting 3 different investment-oriented annual reports to the Assembly on June 2nd. We're also going to be submitting a detailed implementation ordinance for the alcohol tax on June 2nd. And we have an ordinance for the MOA Trust Fund that's going to make some adjustments in how that fund is managed. That also come on June 2nd. So there's quite a few Finance Department Assembly items that'll be coming to you in the very near future. And a lot of that's focused on either the new tax with alcohol or on investment-oriented matters. So that's as much as I can report for today, unless there's questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Moore. Do Assembly members have any questions? Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just curious as to what happened with the hotel revenue when we were actually buying rooms, when the municipality was buying rooms during the emergency, the COVID emergency, for some of the first responders and those that needed specific isolation places. Were we actually paying the hotel tax then, the bed tax, room tax? So we were actually generating some income from that might then be reimbursed from FEMA or CARES Act. And I don't care who answers that. I don't know if anybody has that specific information, but I was just curious. Thanks.
This is Dan Moore. My understanding, because there was some communication a couple months ago on that, is that because it was done for government purpose, they did not charge the tax. So that would not be an option for us to be reimbursed. But in the scheme of things, it would have been a very small amount of tax compared to the second and third quarter.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Mr. Moore, we have another question for you from Mr. Perez-Verdia.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a very small one. I missed the percentage. You said first quarter we were down $1 million on the bed tax. What was the percentage that you said?
Yeah, it was the assumption, because we didn't have 100% of the returns in. We had a vast majority. The overall percentage for first quarter was down 15%, 15%.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Perez-Verdia. Okay, any other questions? I don't see anyone else in the chat. Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Slivka. And
I
we will
can,
go ahead and move.
Madam Chair, I don't know if you wanted just a little bit of color on the revenue impacts from COVID-19. We've talked about some of them, and Mr. Wilbur touched on this as well. Obviously, transit revenues down since they were not running. ACDA, one of our enterprises, revenue is going to be very much adversely impacted. ML&P, our utilities, both ML&P, AWU, and solid waste, not really a revenue impact other than a revenue postponement. We do expect that, while demand will be down, so I think we're expecting that overall, because of reduced commercial activity, ML&P and AWU would see probably a 5% drop in their revenue over the course of the year. But again, still unknown how it plays out over the balance of the year. There is going to be some foregone revenue in that they're not going to be charging interest on bills that are delayed. And I think the municipality has as well communicated that in relation to transportation fees, it's on your agenda for introduction that we are going to be reducing cab and bus fees just to reflect the reduced activity going on there. And again, the rest of the revenue impact is, as Dan said, it's still very early in the year, and we'll know much more in another month or two.
Thank you, Mr. Slivka. We've got a question for you from Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And no one has mentioned the gasoline tax at this point. And if most people are like me, I'm driving at least half as much as I used to drive, so I'm not buying much fuel. And it could possibly be the new normal, as many corporations have said that they may have their employees working permanently from home. So we may have to, when we're putting the budget together for next year, reduce our estimate of what we expect to get from a gasoline tax. And does anybody have any information or estimates on that? Thank you.
Through the chair, again, we only have information through March. This item runs roughly $1 million a month, and it has averaged so far in 2020 roughly that. So it may be down some, but again, it's not likely that it'll be down substantially. But again, it's as Nance has indicated, when we get closer to budgeting time, we'll probably have a much better idea of how this is tracking because we'll have several more months of data.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, may I just say one quick thing too? This is Dan Moore.
Yes, Mr. Moore.
Okay, just to follow up on that fuel tax, Alex gave some good information there. And Alex had also previously said that the city, without an income tax, which is actually done at state level, or a sales tax, general sales tax, it actually has buffered us quite significantly from the effects of COVID-19. I just want to point out with fuel tax, it is an excise tax, so it's based on the volume of product which is purchased. And so even though there is going to be an issue on volume if people don't drive around as much, that's a very good issue, and we'll be on top of that. But also, as everyone knows, the oil prices have plummeted, and so the price of gasoline has gone way, way down. However, the 10-cent per gallon charge that we have for our fuel tax has remained unchanged. So that's we could have had a double whammy if it were a sales tax, but instead it's just going to be impacted by the reduced quantity.
Thanks, Dan. Good point.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anything else, Mr. Peterson?
No, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, any other questions on revenue and revenue impacts? Okay, thank you, Mr. Slivka. Thank you, Mr. Moore. We will go ahead and move on to the next item, which is a report from the Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission, Nolan Clauda.
Yes, for the record, Nolan Clauda, Chair of the Budget Advisory Commission. And my update can be fairly brief. The Budget Advisory Commission did not meet in April. We did just meet in May last week, and so we worked our way through a backlog of items. And in March we had been dealing with the school district budget. We had passed a resolution about that. We were geared up to dig into and do some work on the Q1 budget revisions, but due to COVID and some other issues, we didn't meet in April, and so our last meeting we reviewed the 2019 year-end budget to actuals report. We looked at Lance covered the OMB performance measures, and I think a lot of us were pretty pleased to see how OMB is doing in the eyes of the departments who are sort of their customers. We looked at the 2020 first quarter budget revisions summary, and we're dealing with this stuff after it's already been approved, which is not normally the way that we would be doing things, but just due to timing. The emergency appropriations for COVID-19, and then also the federal CARES funding, which is I think a topic of particular interest. The CARES funding coming to the Muni through the state, which I believe is held up by the lawsuit that was announced yesterday, if I have my facts straight on that. For myself and several other folks on the BAC, I think in our in our day jobs and in the rest of our lives, we are dealing with a lot of the issues related to COVID. I direct a center at UAA, and my whole world has been helping with the economic recovery in response to COVID, and so that's something that's very top of mind. And I think our commission is probably I think we're probably geared towards looking into some of the COVID related issues, and especially some of the uses of the CARES funding that would be coming to the Muni. And so I think that's one of the areas that I think we're probably going to be wanting to look into. Our next meeting will be
Mr. Cloud?
Sorry, yes, Madam Chair.
Apologies for interrupting. Actually, on that topic of the COVID-19 relief funding, CARES Act funding, would your commission then be willing to make some recommendations to the Assembly?
Madam Chair, yes, absolutely. I think that would be. I think that's a topic of interest to a lot of us, and I think we can. I think we can do that.
Okay, great. Well, and also Ms. Quinn Davidson is in the queue with a question, if you don't mind pausing. Ms. Quinn Davidson?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out that both Nolan and Alyssa Rodriguez, who is the vice chair of the BAC, Felix and I invited them to join in the Assembly roundtables we're having as well.
Yes, that's right, and that's and through the chair that I believe is happening tomorrow. Both Alyssa and I will be there, and Alyssa's vice chair of the BAC, and also my colleague in my day job as well.
And on the roundtable, Ms. Quinn Davidson, you were referring to on the alcohol tax or the CARES Act funding?
The CARES Act funding.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Yeah, so we're pleased to participate in that. Otherwise, on the ongoing stuff that our BAC is working on, we were building a lot of good momentum, I think, early in the year. I think, as I've told this group before, we are we've divided up. Each of us is responsible for one or two departments, so that we can do deeper dives into the budgets. And so I think that we're trying that approach so that we can, when budget season comes around, we each have some more specific subject matter knowledge to apply. So, you know, we've extended our meeting times to an hour and a half so that we're able to review more, because we were always a little bit crowded in our agenda. So we're certainly a group that's geared up and has an appetite to do really effective hands-on work. So that's our hope. We did lose a little bit of ground to COVID, like a lot of people did, but we're back in the swing of things now.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Clauda. And thank you for all your hard work and also all the work that the other commissioners are doing. We really appreciate on the Assembly side getting your resolutions and recommendations. Is there anything you need from us?
Currently, no, but I think it's certainly helpful. And I'm sorry, Madam Chair, it's certainly helpful though to have the direction from the Assembly. So especially if the CARES funding is a priority and the Assembly is looking for priorities on that or guidance or input on that, that's something I think that's a good role for us.
Okay, great. That's good to know. And actually, Ms. Quinn Davidson, has another question.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering, since Nolan brought up or maybe it was you, Suzanne, who mentioned the alcohol tax. If there's any, we hadn't involved the BAC in that in terms of our plan for the next couple months, but it might be useful. We're sort of farming out to the committees the responsibility of determining priorities for each of those committees as they relate to the alcohol tax buckets. But should the BAC have specific thoughts or interest in engaging, I'm sure we'd all welcome that as well.
Oh, through the chair, thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I think that's a good point. I think that prior to COVID, that had been something we were very interested in, is making recommendations on that funding. And at that point, we didn't know if it was going to pass or not. So, thank you.
And if I can follow up, Madam Chair.
Oh yes, of course.
Just quickly, so what our plan is tomorrow we're having a work session to go over the possible, just to sort of introduce the topic and start talking with our colleagues about what we might want to spend the money on. And then from there, we'll spend a couple months out in committees, in the Homelessness Committee, the Health Policy Committee, and the Public Safety Committee. And then we'll engage in a series of town halls in August with the public. And then in August and September, make an official sort of recommendation to ourselves or regroup, and then maybe decision from there that folds into the 2021 budget. So you can maybe talk with the BAC about how you want to engage, and if you do, and that's the timeline that we're working on.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. Mr. Cauda, did you have anything else?
Madam Chair, that is it for me.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being here and providing this update, and for all the work you all are doing on the commission. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you very much.
All righty. Any other questions or comments from members? I don't see anyone in the chat. Okay, so we will go ahead and move on to item E, scope and status of pay correction liability, which Mr. Wilbur, I believe you'll be touching on.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start this one, and I know some other folks on, but again, remind the Assembly that we had brought on some folks to help us do payroll audits with the commitment to review everyone's payroll since we went live in September of 17. And I'm pleased to say that we started with the audits of the IBEW as it related to ML&P to make sure that we had those on track and complete before the sale, and that is ahead of schedule. I think we are very close to getting that done. We are through the Assembly support, we were able to bring on an additional auditor that will be supporting that effort. We'll then be picking those audits up. If recall, initially when we started the process, we were pretty slow on the audit process, but we, thanks to some support from Susie Shop, that some members of her team were helping HR in the payroll side to perfect the use of the system in SAP, come up with a methodology, and now I believe they're on a process, I think, of 25 to 35. And Susie, if you can recall, I don't remember if it was a day or a week, but we're rapidly moving through those. I just can't remember the time frame on how many they're actually accomplishing a week, but they're making good progress. And then as it relates to payroll errors, the last report from the last pay period, we had about 50 of them, and about 15 to 20 of them, of those 50 were just related to human error, individual employees putting in a different code. The errors were not related to a system problem or some activities inside the payroll, but we're down to a minimal amount, and I would say probably a similar or less amount of payroll corrections, though our goal is 0 payroll corrections through every pay period prior to the time when we started SAP. So lots of improvements there, lots of success going on with the support of IT and the efforts through payroll. Again, we're moving through the audit process, and we'll be going through bargaining unit by bargaining unit. That's all I have. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Wilbur. And we've got Mr. Falsey on the line, and then a question from Mr. Peterson. Mr. Falsey, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry to Lance, I should have made my presence a little bit more known. I'm trying my level best to emerge a bit from the COVID cave and find my way back to the Assembly. Lance got the highlights. I'll give you a little bit more detail. I think it's now been several months since we may have previewed this for the Assembly, but we thought that 2020 was we were entering into a new window in the payroll world, and there were 3 things that were going on there. First, we were increasingly bringing all the SAP reconfigurations in-house so that we could get away from the consultant model. Second, that we had taken the retros, the system-generated corrections, about as far as we knew how to take them. And last, that we're then declaring that it was time to pick up everybody that has worked for us since we first turned SAP on and look at how they were actually paid and make sure it was as close to correct as we know how to make it. And in that vein, we thought this is actually the perfect time to marry up IT with payroll in a more forceful way, so that someone was seeing all parts of the machine, meaning that IT was increasingly getting comfortable with the new role that they were going to be playing. They would understand the needs that payroll had and how best to prioritize them in the reconfiguration world. And we could make sure that we were setting up our audit system to work as quickly as it could. So Lance already gave the punchline on those two things. The machine now seems to be performing pretty well. So for March and April, we had less than 40 or less than 50 in March and less than 40 in April of submitted new pay corrections. And a couple things to say about those. We are processing all the new pay corrections in real time, sort of the way we were back in the old PeopleSoft era. And Lance is right. A good proportion of them, a third to a half of them, have just been people coded their time wrong. So I think in large measure, the machine is now built and the machine is now working. It's not super user-friendly, but it's getting the job done. Meanwhile, we have been processing all the audits. We have gone through 9 different employees for the fire union, which were part of the grievance resolution. We've gone through 12 employees for the plumbers. We've done NECA audits, MLMP generation, MLMP power, MLMP operations, MLMP customer service, MLMP engineering, MLMP administration and finance. We are hoping that, and we believe we'll be on track to finish all of the active MLMP employees before the sale date would happen. And then there would be a few inactive IBEW employees that we would finish up there. And then the IBEW story would be done. So as Lance said, I think it seems like the system is working as we hoped it would. The statistic is that we're doing 29 audits a week. So we are going to be in this auditing phase for a really long time. But we're going to try to make it go as quickly as we possibly can. To that point, I'd say the agenda item here has been labeled this way for a long time, and it's sort of fallen out of the current status. We're really now in the audits. So for going forward, I might suggest that the update would be on the status of the pay audits rather than the scope of the liability. By having the various grievance settlements, we've sort of moved past that chapter.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Falsey. We can definitely make that change to future agendas. And Mr. Peterson has questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And before all this COVID-19 craziness started, I was contacted a couple months ago by a plumber, and they were getting very frustrated about problems with payroll. And so I'm according to what Bill said, maybe the audit has straightened that out. Are we still getting pay corrections from the plumbers regularly each month?
Through the chair to Mr. Peterson, I am aware of the last pay cycle. We had a total of 5 pay corrections that came from the plumbers, and 2 of them we resolved by saying they were just incorrectly reported. 2 of them we said there was no error, and 1 is in processing, and I'll have statistics on that. So, I mean, the answer is across all of the unions, we're still going to get onesies, twosies, but I'm not seeing a systemic problem. I think there was, and maybe this doesn't align with the timeline, but I think there was a moment where there was some COVID-related leave that got time coded incorrectly. Partly that was because the rules of the game changed. There was a federal law that got passed that changed how we had to do COVID leave. But I believe that's all been sorted out in the main as well. So if you have details on things that I'm not seeing, please do pass them along because we would like to get them addressed.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Peterson and Mr. Falsey. It's great to have you back. Okay. Any other comments on this agenda item or questions? Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to item F, AR 2020-152, lifecycle replacements and moving SAP HEC in-house. And Ms. Marshall or Mr. Wilbur, if one of you would go ahead and take it from here.
I'm going to turn it over to Susie.
Okay, thank you, Lance. All right, desktop lifecycle management, we can tackle that one first. That is a $40,000 capital request. It's a plan. Every year we have to replace a certain number of computers because they age out. So that's really what that is, a making sure we're managing our desktop life cycle. Equipment just dies after a certain amount of years. But do you have any questions on that one? It's pretty straightforward.
I don't see anybody.
Okay. Okay. SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud. So that's HEC, SAP HEC. Moving that to on-prem. And our current spend on that. So operationally, we spend over 1.75 million a year in operation budget to have our SAP environment, so all of our systems running in the SAP HANA Enterprise Cloud environment. It's very expensive, and it that was the agreement made years ago when this thing got turned on, and we have done an extensive research effort to try to see what is the best path forward. We did some comparisons on keeping it in SAP HANA, which would include a 3.3% increase in costs. We reviewed moving everything to hosting everything in Microsoft Azure. And then we compared it all to moving it back on-prem. And I'm going to say on-premises is moving it back into our data network. And before we went live, I think I don't know if it was 6 months before we went live with SAP, SAP used to be on premises. And then there was this move to put it into the HEC environment right before we went live. So we do have extensive experience in-house, the infrastructure team supporting this environment, one. But we went through all the costs and can we do it? Can we support it? And the answer was yes. So we are moving in that direction. So with the capital cost of 1.1 million, we'll be able to build out get all the additional hardware and systems needed to support moving it on-prem. And then we're going to have a savings of probably over $1 million in our budget just by this move annually. So security risk, there is no additional security risk. It would be probably less because we aren't having to, we used to have part of having it SAP in the HANA environment wasn't a lower 48. So you have to provision a tunnel to connect to them. So we won't have that tunnel. It'll be local. So there's less risk in that travel. And then we have definitely our security systems in-house, and we'll have in-house people that all have CGIS requirements that can touch the system. So I think it's definitely a win-win, and we are taking our time and making sure we're going through the process and very detailed project plan.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Marshall. We've got two members in the queue. First, Mr. Dunbar, and then Mr. Weddleton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Susie, or Ms. Marshall, a couple questions. So, just so I made sure I heard you right, you said 1.1 million initial startup costs. Is that right? And then about $750,000 yearly cost thereafter.
At the most, yes.
Okay, and so presumably, what did the contract with SAP look like that we initially set up? And we've been using this HANA system. How soon can we make this change without breaching that contract if one exists?
Our existing contract expires in February of 2021.
Those $1.1 million initial startup costs, I assume that includes some kind of physical server or something else like that to actually build. Yep. Do you think that can be done by February of next year?
Yes, and we actually are on schedule to hopefully have it testing at the end of September this year. Yes.
And can you for our edification, unless it's like a state secret, can you say where those servers actually will be physically?
Oh, sure. At the GCI data center here locally. That's the municipality's data center now. Is that they call it the South Anchorage Data Center. It's a GCI facility.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You betcha.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Weddleton, and then Mr. Constant.
Oh, thanks. So, a couple thoughts on that. I mean, didn't we approve the funding source for that 1.1 million at our previous meeting, or is that up for public hearing at our?
I think how it works is that you pitch and Lance could correct me on this, is that we say this is what what we want to do for capital for this year, and then I think it gets approved, but then we actually have to go through this step with the AM and the AR to get it appropriated. Lance, can you help me on that?
I think you're right. Yes, Susie, I believe that's correct. Mr. Weddleton, I can't recall the assembly action, but I do recall probably in the last month or so, we did in IT's capital budget, they have a list of all of their capital improvements, and we I think appropriated the dollars to improve those capital improvements, but I will go back and verify.
I don't know, it just occurred to me, we looked at that through the key being master lease loan thing, but so Susie, on what's the, I mean, you've got to have some way, GCI gets hit with an earthquake. Where's our backup?
Right. This plan, so we do lots of different backups, but we also this plan includes doing a disaster recovery up in Microsoft Azure, which is wherever the Microsoft Azure cloud is physically, but I think probably in the Seattle data center. And
okay,
that's
good.
What we're provisioning. Yep. Making sure that we get our disaster recovery super solid too.
Good, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. And I'll just note, this is item 14L on the May 19th agenda. Okay, Mr. Constant?
Thank you. I just wanted to state that after Mr. Dunbar spoke, I have little hairs on the back of my neck stand up in fear a little bit. And that is transitioning from wherever SAP is now to a new server, a new system. Susie, what are your thoughts on kind of bumps in the road, and kind of, do we need seatbelts for that conversation too as it starts to go forward?
The way we're approaching this is we are not going to turn off the SAP HEC environment until we're solid that our local environment is working at 100% perfection. So that's our plan. And that, so it includes lots of testing. And I do feel like we do have the staff on board now to really support it. So I honestly think the risk is very minimal. I don't think we'll need seat belts. I can give project status reports if you want. I do feel like it's really gonna, we are taking all the steps to make sure we get it right. And lots of testing, and we won't turn off HEC until we make sure it's gonna work.
So that raises the secondary question of, and that all sounds great. I support all of that. That raises the secondary question of, do we need to run parallel contracts, funding, maintain support in that environment while we're implementing and upgrading, or is that kind of all built into your plan?
That's built into the plan, and that's why. We are working with SAP to not extend the contract. So we have through February of 2021 to make sure that we have it up and running and working. So it is definitely, we won't be paying anything additional because that's already in the budget.
So I might offer that we negotiate with them a kind of a off-ramp that would allow a short-term extension in case we find we need it, but that's an administrative function, and I just be careful.
Yeah, no, I get it. And I really appreciate you being thoughtful and making sure we think about all those things.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Constant. Oh, Sorry,
That's,
go ahead, Ms.
that's okay. I
Marshall.
was just going to say there is a month-to-month that we have exercised. So I can add that too. But we'll only use it if we need it. So. End report.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. We are just out of time, just about out of time, and I don't see any other members in the queue right now. Could I get a motion to extend for 5 minutes since we've got 10 minutes in between until our next meeting?
So moved. Constant.
And a second?
Second, Rivera.
Okay. I'm going to assume that since no one is objecting, that we're good to continue. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on quickly just to legislative priorities and budget items for 2021, and then audience participation. And actually, would one of the co-chairs from last year, either Ms. Quinn Davidson or Mr. Dunbar, want to comment on any legislative priorities from last year we may want to carry over into this year as we take up that discussion?
Forrest?
Or I can comment.
I was going to suggest you, Ms. Quinn Davidson, because my dryer is running.
Okay, well, we had texted with Suzanne a bit about this, and she had asked one of us to highlight priorities. And the two things that came up were talking about the port and school bond debt reimbursement. There's obviously other priorities that we've discussed, but those are two things worth noting.
Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. So we had those as priorities from last year, and we'll come back to this since obviously we're at a time right now, but if members would continue to give some thought as to what we might want to include for legislative priorities for this committee. I see Mr. Constant is in the queue. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. So as relates to the port, the Enterprise and Utility Oversight Committee this next week will be discussing that topic. So we'll definitely be priming that.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Constant. Okay, moving on to budget items for 2021. Mr. Wilbur gave us an overview of the schedule, and I believe Desiree has sent that out. I wanted to comment on the strategic timeline that the Assembly has for the 2021 budget, and I'll be sending an email out later with this information. You may recall that last year, the Assembly developed a list of budget priorities, and we shared that with the administration via a memo. Some of those priorities were included for funding in the budget. We plan to prepare another list of priorities and submit that to the administration for consideration or to request to be included in the budget for 2021. And we are going to start with a Rules Committee meeting on May 29 where we brainstorm ideas, and that then in June, committees are asked to take up those items in their monthly meeting using the 2021 budget priority standing item that's on all of the committee agendas. After each committee meeting via email, we'll update the list and send it to the body for review. And then at the Rules Committee on June 26th, we'll finalize the list and then send it to the administration just like last time in a memo for review. We did that a little bit later in the process, I think the first week of August, and we are planning to do this in early July this year to give more time to work those items into the budget. So any comments or questions? Actually, Mr. Rivera is in the queue. Mr. Rivera?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And so this is something that Ms. LaFrance, Ms. Quinn Davidson, and I talked with the administration about, because we wanted to get a better sense of when should we, in sort of the sausage making of the budget for 2021, when is the best time for us, the Assembly, to weigh in? And last year we weighed in August, and Mr. Wilbur was pretty transparent with us that that was too late for us to weigh in, that if we wanted to really get our priorities in the budget as it was being developed by the administration, that we needed to get it in in mid-July. And so that's why we're pushing for an earlier July timeframe for us to get a similar memo to what was done last year, but for 2021. And for folks who don't remember that memo, we discussed that plenty of times in Rules Committee meetings and other meetings. So I'm happy to send that, ask the clerk's office to send that out to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivera. I think that would be a great idea to have it resent. We've got Ms. Zelatel in the queue, and then we're just about out of time. Ms. Zelatel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. One word of, I guess, caution or hesitancy is with regard to some of the homelessness items. July could be pressing it just as we're continuing to play out the summer season with regards to camp abatement. So I would just flag that issue. We may or may not still be trying some things out or looking at what might change for the following year. And that could really carry through till August when we start to work on the point in which we start to debrief how the summer went. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Zelatel. Okay, we will go ahead and move on now to audience participation. And I will go through the list. Oh, I'm sorry, who's that?
Eugene Haberman.
Oh, okay, Mr. Haberman, you will actually, since we do not have much time, you have 1 minute.
That's all I need. I was planning that.
Okay.
Okay. Number one, I'm glad there was an agenda for this meeting. My name is Eugene Carl Haberman. I live in the Matsu Valley. I'm glad there was an agenda for the meeting then, but it was buried somewhere, and I wonder where it is. It should be where the public notice is. There was no reports written that I could see on your website scenario for this meeting, just the agenda, and and we're dealing with money. And then the last thing I'll say is this, because I said I'll be brief. The lawsuit filed to block coronavirus aid plan that violated the Alaska Constitution. I'm surprised that just a couple words was mentioned on it for this meeting. You would have thought that more was discussed, because the fact is, and I'm glad to see the lawsuit, because the fact is you can't have a committee in the legislature saying, okay, this is the way it's going to be. The legislature's responsibility is to approve funding. And when they get back to business and do their job, okay, which they're supposed to be doing, they're the ones to decide, and the governor can veto. But this has been bypassed, and it just shows there's less of a conversation with the people and also with elected officials on this issue. That's all I have to say, and thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haberman. Was there anyone else who wanted to participate? I think the number 907-343-4496. Maybe someone internal. Did you want to speak? Okay. Seeing no one else, and since we're a little bit behind schedule, we will go ahead and adjourn. Thank you all for attending. This meeting is adjourned.